Welcome to Boom, where we have
Biomechanics on our minds.
Boom.
Boom, boom, boom.
Boom, 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 boom.
Boom.
Today we are so excited to have an awesome guest, Jenn Heil, who is a Canadian freestyle skier from Spruce Grove, Alberta. She won the first gold medal for Canada in the 2006 Winter Olympic Games in Turin, Italy, and a silver medal at the 2010 Winter Olympic Games in Vancouver. She is the reigning world champion in dual moguls, and beyond these championships, Jenn is a Guinness World Record Holder, Canadian Order of Sport Recipient, Stanford Graduate School of Business Leadership Award winner, founder, the mother of 2 boys, and so much more, which we're excited to get into today. And a new friend too. So we're really excited to have Jenn in the area. And just thank you so much for joining us on Boom today, Jenn.
Yeah, as I said, I'm here with my 2 favorite podcasters, so I'm ready to go.
Yes, thank you for repeating that on air. We really appreciate that. So one of the many things that I'm amazed by when I learn more about you is that you started skiing when you were just 2 years old. I tried to ski recently, and I can barely do that. So this really impressed me. Maybe 2 is a little bit young to remember when you first knew that you wanted to ski, but I'm wondering if you remember the first time that you wanted to be an Olympian, and if you could share a little bit about what that was like.
Yeah, well, first off, it's way easier to start skiing when you're 2 than later in life, so I'll just put that out there. You don't question it, you roll easily down the hill.
I still roll down the hill. But yeah, just not very
Melissa's
easily.
being humble. She's a good skier.
Yeah, I'm sure. I remember actually loving skiing, and I was a bit of a shy daredevil, and I just remember begging my dad to put me on the T-bar alone. I'm like, I got this, and I just wanted to be gone, and I'm flying down the hill. So, yeah. And then when I wanted to become an Olympian, I was with my mom. She worked from home, and she was schlepping me along on her errands, and I was so bored, and we had to stop for gas, and I ran into the gas station and I picked up a Sports Illustrated magazine, and it was the preview of the Olympics. And so I was turning the pages, and right then and there in the gas station in West Edmonton, I decided I wanted to be an Olympian. And so I just needed to go and find a sport. And so, yeah, that stayed with me. I remember in school when they'd ask you what you were dreaming of, I would always say Olympian. And one day I was sharpening my pencil in grade 2, and Miss Wangler walked over to me, my teacher, and she pointed at the board that of all our dreams that we had put up. And she's like, Jen, I think you could do that one day. And I was like, wow. And it kind of went from this dream on a poster board to, wow, someone really believes in me,
Wow.
beyond my parents. And that kind of crystallized it. Yeah.
Whoa. Yeah, from Sports Illustrated, something captured you. In the gas station, you're like, I'm going for this. And then
Yeah.
a teacher recognizes. Did she know that you, do you know what, did your teacher say more about sort of, where those beliefs came from? Was that from your performance as a student, or just, your attitude, or?
I actually have no idea. I'm pretty intense, so that could have been
She could see that even in grade 2.
well, let's get this kid's energy going in the right place. But I mean, already by grade 2, I love sport. I just completely felt free doing sport, and I was always giving 100%. So she probably would have seen some of that too.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, out of all the time skiing, if there's any particular time and awards and championships, is there any time that really stands out as a time that is really memorable in a positive way for you, or you felt particularly accomplished or excited about something you achieved?
Oh man. I mean, I have the privilege of saying, there was a number of those moments, but I mean, my proudest performance actually was the first World Cup race after the Olympics, my first Olympics, and I finished fourth by 1/100th of a point. And so it was disappointing and like hugely crushing to miss a medal like that, but it was also really rewarding because I was so new on the tour that I was proud, of that performance. But I had nothing to lose in the next race, and we were in Inuashiro, Japan, where it is the steepest course in the world. Like, men will cry in training because the top jump, it's like you're jumping into the abyss. Like, you can't even see the landing. You have to fully commit on this like angle. You can't see the landing.
No.
And so it's terrifying. But I remember watching the best male skier at the time, Jani Latala from Finland, and I was like, oh man, he skis so beautifully. Okay, I'm just gonna like put him in my mind, and I'm just gonna hold nothing back. And it's like my skis stuck to the snow the whole way down, apart from the jumps, and I like just skied a flawless run on the most difficult course. And it was just this amazing feeling of freedom, where I always felt the safest when I was like just over my limit. Like, I just felt connected to the snow, so in the moment. And that was one of the few places where I was like that far over and flawless. Yeah, my coach said that I could have, been in probably the top 7 men or women that day. So that was really exciting. Yeah.
Wow. I love this idea of your skis sticking to the snow. Like, that's something only you can feel and know if you're like really in it.
Well, and 3 moguls per second is like a lot going on. So it definitely doesn't look like the skis are sticking to the snow. But yeah, I love competition because I always felt like this safety bubble because of like that intensity and like channeling my emotions and my focus into it. I always felt very protected and safe. And I love that intense threshold. And that's kind of the feeling of skis sticking to the snow.
It's so interesting. This like the words you've used so far, like protected and safe, going 3 moguls a second, and then also earlier you said shy daredevil. It's like, these are words I would never necessarily put together, but I feel like that just speaks to your awesome perspective and also diversity of experience and expertise.
I mean, I think I am a juxtaposition, and I've come to accept it. It's very confusing at times, but yeah, I'm like pretty fearless, but also cautious. It's like just this weird mix. Yeah.
I like to say, I feel that way sometimes. That like I like to take calculated risks. Like, it seemed like they're risks, but there's a lot of preparation that go into the risk. So, similarly, but it was awesome to hear about sort of that best time. But also on your website, you have this quote that's, over the years I've been up, I've also been down and broken, hung up my skis for good, but I've never stopped fighting for the space to create new limits. And it's clear that that drive has led you to really push those limits and be in these awesome spaces, but also maybe just reflecting on the times where you've been down and broken and times have been a little bit more challenging. Can you share what were the things leading up to those? How did you build that awareness of those feelings, and what helped you overcome those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, there's moments where I've been crushed, and then there's like longer periods of time where I really felt down and broken. And multiple points, I mean, many points. The question is, which one do you want to zero in on? But I guess the first one really was right after the 2002 Olympics. So it was deemed a success to be that young and at my first Olympics and finishing fourth. But I was completely crushed because I realized how far I was from being my best. It really wasn't a performance where I felt like I could command the performance, like I was in control. I had like one of my biggest crashes in training just before the final run. And I kind of felt like I had to hope to do my best. And behind the scenes, I was struggling a lot. So I had chronic shin splints, which no one really had an answer for. So it was really hard for me to ski a top to bottom run. So I'd have to do a lot of visualization. I'd have to side slip the course and like imagine myself going through the challenging sections rather than actually skiing them. And then just emotionally, I was already completely burnt out at 18. There was just so much going on in the team and the pressure of, learning how to compete and stand out as well and be away from home and like all those things. I was pretty burnt out. And so I didn't have the spark. And so I just really felt like something had to change. And that's where, with my coach and a business leader in Montreal, we kind of made this plan for success where we didn't want to compromise any of the preparation. And that meant having to go and find the resources. And so that's the moment where I moved across the country and raised hundreds of thousands of dollars to go out and hire, the best team. So the best physiologist, the best strength and conditioning coach, best physiotherapist, deep tissue masseuse, nutritionist. And then over time, that team actually continued to grow. And then I took a year off from competition, which I was to work with this team and rebuild my body. And I was highly criticized by my federation because it was a chronic injury, not an acute injury. And also, the national media told me that there was no chance I'd be able to come back and be successful for taking that much time away from people. So yeah, that was the first major big downer moment, but it really motivated me to shift my path and again, find the joy in the process and like getting better every day. And that's where kind of that endless energy and power comes from, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's so interesting to hear this team that you built. And it's such a diverse team, like you were saying, from, massage therapists to physiotherapists to nutritionists. And I would love to hear more about the impact that you feel like having such a diverse team made, and even as you said, it continued to grow as well, and how those teams interacted or worked together, like you were able to sort of integrate all of those different aspects of health together for your both like physical and mental well-being.
Yeah, so the unique part wasn't having access to these resources, because a lot of athletes have access to these resources on their own. It's usually for less time. It's usually more reactive to an injury or a problem. My approach was really to be proactive and put this team around me to build me up rather than to like fix me. And I think the other part that really differentiated it was this was an integrated team. And so at the center was my technical coach, and my technical coach was managing and reporting to all the specialists. So if I looked tired, like we would modify training. Technically, I was having a hard time balancing my weight onto my right ski. So my turns were slightly lopsided and it was holding me back from a speed perspective. So we actually rebuilt like my body in the gym to balance that out. Physio doubled down on rehabbing that. And so, yeah, we really worked from a performance standpoint. What's the outcome all the way back? And then I didn't realize it at the time, but now having worked in the safe sport environment and having helped design and lead the development of the Canadian safe sport system, I really realized that my health and well-being was at the center of that. And that's actually quite unique. A lot of coaches and attitudes in sport are, that you have to break the individual or, push on the buttons for anger or to motivate them further. And I really felt like my whole team had Jenn's back first and my best interests, which then just created this sustainable excellence over time. So just really fortunate that, every practitioner, it wasn't about their ego. It wasn't about connecting my results to their career. It was really what's best for Jenn. Yeah, that was really the probably difference maker in my entire career.
Yeah, and it's great, I think, to see that from both the physical and mental health perspective and really having those together versus, like you're saying, sometimes they're prioritizing physical health aspect of it and kind of neglecting the mental health. But then at the end of the day, I think over the long term, those really go hand in hand. And it's hard to have one without the other. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think over the short term, to your point, you can definitely get performance under, really difficult, extraneous circumstances, but it's the sustained performance that gets lost there and isn't always the best interest of the athlete being put first. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wanted to follow up on something that you had mentioned, both with the earlier question and this past question, which is about visualization. And I'm so excited that you brought this up because I've been at a psychology conference this past week, and they talked about visualization for sports performance, and even the study where they asked volleyball players to visualize flying, and that helped them jump higher. So it's just fascinating. And then it was really interesting to hear you talk about visualizing both yourself as another athlete who is a high performer, and then visualizing the course before you execute, I guess, the run. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that process and how you think it's been beneficial for you in your performance, and then if there's any other sort of techniques or things that you feel like you've used that have been beneficial when you're either preparing for a run or taking on something challenging like that.
Yeah, you're asking me to dissect my whole approach to performance in one question, but I'll do my best.
It's a challenge. We believe in you.
Thank you. So I was very lucky. My dad introduced me to meditation, visualization, and yoga before anyone was talking about it. So when I was probably 7, he started to introduce these concepts to me. And my first sport was actually competitive swimming. And so I remember he taught me how to visualize the race before and to see myself succeeding and the feelings in my body. And so I would do it before every race just because it's what I did. And then one race I didn't do it. I was hanging out at the side of the pool. I didn't want to go take the time to do it and get into the right mental space. And I was completely lost in that race. Didn't know where I was. It was a terrible race. Didn't feel like I was in my body. And from that moment forward, I was like, okay, I'll visualize every time I do this. And so it really was a part of my practice. It's still a part of my practice now that I'm not a skier. I visualize everything and the states I want. And so, so I'll try and fast track this. But the ultimate performance is really the integration of mental, physical, and emotional. And visualization is a great tool to integrate that. So for example, when I'm doing a jump, I have to break down the technical components. So where my vision is, holding the pressure on the front of my skis to really set the power to push off the jump with the exact timing. And then once I'm in the air, what I'm going to do. So that's I'll be visualizing that. But then I have to feel this really big comfort with speed. And so I actually have to feel myself kind of letting go and letting this speed wash over me. Because that's when you do your best tricks, is when you're going the fastest, really. And then emotionally, I have to switch from fear, which is a very normal reaction. And I have to kind of shift into joy and excitement and challenge. And so that's what I'm trying to align every component of the entire run, run, whether training or competition. And where this conversation started was this idea of the safety net in competition. And it's easiest to integrate it when you have, in a sport like mogul skiing that requires such intensity, when you have the adrenaline and the stress. Over time, that's where you can bonk and screw up, but also over time you learn to control it, and it's like a fuel and a source of getting into that place of integration. How did I do? Did I answer it all in a few sentences?
Amazing. It's so cool to hear the dissection and the layering and then how it all comes together. And I think as a lot of our listeners are biomechanists, I'm interested in if you could speak at all about, maybe I loved what you said about where your weight and pressure is on your skis. It seems like having those techniques down first, and then there's sort of these layers on top of that as far as having the other pieces, the psychological, mental, emotional pieces, and then being able to integrate those together. But I'm curious about sort of that foundation piece, and I think a lot of our audience probably think about the sort of fine-tuned biomechanics that are there. And can you speak a little bit more about how you train or learn those things, and maybe even how visualization, like how you connect that with your sort of other pieces?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about in terms of mogul skiing and biomechanics. Most of it doesn't make sense, probably.
Physics breaks.
It's quite an interesting. Yeah. It's quite an interesting sport because you have to manage all the forces. Your hips and shoulders are square down the hill. So like there's fundamentals that you learn on the flats. So my hips and shoulders are always down the hill. It's not carving a turn like an alpine skier would carve, or I'd carve a turn just for fun. It's actually like a slide and an edge, which allows us to get like quickly from side to side. And so we practice a lot of that movement. Some of the most valuable technical practice is on the flats. And I had a coach that was just really, really dialed into making us do flat runs over and over. And that creates the base movement without having, the extra challenge of having to absorb and having these lumps of snow coming at you. And so it's just that repetition over and over. We could get a lot of repetition without the impact on our bodies. In terms of learning our jumps, we do them on trampoline. So a trampoline, it's very different from the takeoff of a jump, but the repetition of where your hips need to be and how you set the rotation and the power comes from that. And then we go to water ramps. So we go to a ramp made of wood covered with plastic meanies, and then we land in a pool. And so that's, again, different angles from a mogul jump, because a mogul jump is actually very sharp and quite small. And so there's so much force that you have to build up, and it's the extension and the time of the extension that really allows you to get the height and distance. And so, yeah, we do a lot of repetition, and then that's where visualization comes in, because there is so much impact on your body in this sport that in order to get the extra reps, visualization is pretty critical. And so, yeah, those are those pieces. And then near the end of my career, we started to integrate dartfish, where we could see like comparison to other athletes, to the angles of our absorption. But the most valuable insight actually probably that I ever received came from the analysis through dartfish and our biomechanists, where we realized that the first mogul section to the top jump was actually the most important of the entire course, which usually a lot of us would be cautious and build up through that. But the speed in which you set out of the gate to that jump exponentially increases like how fast you'll finish the run. And so that became kind of a new focus. And it was quite a funny thing because my coach would be like, okay, now super fast out of the gate. And I'd be like, super fast for one mogul, and like put the brakes on. Action. And so like, again, through visualization, it was like letting myself have that speed, understanding I could handle that force and all those pieces. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of what you said earlier. It's like layering piece on piece and over time, which allows you to have that level of expertise.
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear. And it's just like, it's incredible. I think, yeah, what you're saying, just all of these pieces where it's like the extremes of everything, but finding a way to have them come together and is, yeah, just incredible to hear about. I wanted to shift a little bit to something else that I was learning about you that I thought was really amazing, which is that you've helped build British Columbia's safe sport infrastructure. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about your role in this and its importance, both as importance having this infrastructure, but then also for you as an athlete actually being able to be part of building this.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was one of the most meaningful, projects I've been able to be a part of. So I was VP of Sport Development at Via Sport British Columbia. So it's the organization that manages all of the funding of sport for 800,000 members in British Columbia. So we interface with government and then help support all of the sport organizations from grassroots up to kind of transition to national team. And so when I took the role, my team was already starting to think about safe sport. And, you know, I hadn't been retired that long. And so I was like, oh, wow, safe sport. Huh. And it wasn't something we actively spoke about as athletes. It wasn't something we were able to recognize as athletes. So it was actually a pretty big emotional journey for me to kind of relive my experiences and those around me through this new lens of actually understanding what it is to have, you know, a space of emotional, physical, and mental safety. And so in order to advance the file and show government that this was critical and needed to happen now, I started to talk with a number of athletes that had been trying to report sexual abuse in their environment for over a decade.
Wow.
Again, you know, I didn't really know about it. I'd kind of heard a few whispers, but I sat down with a number of them and really mapped their journey around trying to report so I could bring this to government. And I don't remember the exact statistics, but it was something like they tried to report, you know, 16 times, including to the police, to multiple people at the top level of their organization, and nothing got done. And so eventually the person that they were trying to report did go to jail, but it took almost 2 decades. And so their support and their bravery and their courage really allowed us to be like, the time is now. This is no longer acceptable. Like, it stops here. And my CEO was super supportive because we were pushing pretty hard and doing, really pushing government to act. And so in partnership with the national organization, we started to build out the code for implementation, which is now being used across Canada, and really start to map the pathway of an athlete and administrator through this adjudication process. So we had 7 lawyers working pro bono for us. A big reason why this hadn't advanced was because of privacy issues around the code and reporting. So yeah, I mean, we've had people fighting for decades with like little to no movement, and then the moment kind of was now. And so it was really fortunate to be able to kind of crystallize a lot of that thinking and approach. And now Canada has a Safe Sport Centre. BC's developing its own as well. So we're moving, but it's a long, difficult process. And I do have, you know, there's a lot of instances where there's bad actors, but also even when people want to do the right thing, the systems don't exist. And so, you know, it's challenging on everyone who loves sport and is trying to do the best thing. So we're moving in the right direction, much like here in the US.
Wow. I'm just thinking back to your second grade teacher being like, yeah, you can do that. And I'm seeing in these so many notes in your career of how you've taken something that's just been super, super challenging and seems like no one's been able to move forward on or move forward with at the same speed or with the same intensity. And it's incredible to see how you really just push and fight and get things done. And yeah, I think, yeah, that clearly has made a huge difference for a lot of people. And as you're saying, like, there's still progress to be made, but I think important to celebrate what you have done and accomplished. So thanks for sharing that, Jenn. To switch a little bit to a new topic, I'm curious if you could tell us more about what you're doing now. And you've sort of gone from skiing to more involvement in sport to now Coco Health, your current endeavor. And so curious a little bit more to share what your journey was to creating this startup and also transitioning maybe away from a little bit of that performance space to this new space.
And maybe what Coco Health is too for listeners.
Okay, well, why don't we start there? So Coco Health, we're really trying to change the way women interact with the medical system. And so 2 out of 3 women in America report feeling misunderstood by healthcare. And no, it's not all in their heads like they're often told. And so the impact of women feeling misunderstood and being invisible in the data is that women are diagnosed on average 4 years later than men across hundreds of diseases. In a new study. Yeah, it's pretty shocking. And women historically have been treated as little men, despite having our unique physiologies, unique demonstration of symptoms. And so kind of the most common example right now is that when a woman experiences a heart attack, she's 50% more likely not to be diagnosed of a heart attack because the symptoms present differently than what doctors have been taught to look out for in med school. And so we really want to go to like the root of that issue in that, and in the fact that women's data isn't out there and hasn't been studied, and the impact of that from end-to-end care. And our goal is to get women to, from the onset of need to care 50% more quickly by aggregating different types of data sets. So data sets that women are already creating. So through their phone, through wearables, through their voice. All of these are showing to be really accurate when combined with AI around mental health and physical health anomalies. So we're able to create this continuous view of a woman's health. And then when we detect an anomaly, that's when our nurse practitioner reaches out to them to check in on them and to do a proper intake and preliminary diagnosis if necessary. So kind of this idea of, it will start as an app and you just download the app, and then you set the data sync, and then you forget about it. And that's like our intention. Like, don't have one more thing you have to interact with. Just know, like, in the background, if you need help, a nurse practitioner will reach out. And we're starting with postpartum and perinatal care.
Yeah, it's such a paradigm shift, especially in the US, I think. Sometimes we see this in Europe where especially like postpartum, women are given help in the home, and people are kind of coming in and checking in on them. But in the US, like, we really don't see that. And I love that you are taking this approach too of using passive data, and so women don't have something else to do, and then just also having that end-to-end point where we're then connecting them with a healthcare professional, which is really what we need in the end. Like, we can detect these things, but then what are we going to do about it? Because if we only tell them that we're detecting something, I feel like that also runs the risk of just like scaring them and then not having access to the healthcare practitioner that they need. So it's been really exciting to, I think, both see the way you're tackling this problem and like leveraging new advancements in AI and engineering, but also supporting that with really tangible care.
Yeah, I mean, it's really informed from my experiences as an athlete. So if I think about it, I had the most privileged medical team around me. I had since I was a teenager. And so I had people constantly monitoring me and connecting me to the resources. In most cases, before I had a critical issue or the symptom was so great, they could detect it early. And so I lived that experience thinking it was quite normal, I guess. And then I retired out of sport and had children quite soon after. And so I went from having this world-class team around me, connected care all the time, to being alone. And when my second son was born, I struggled to hold him at 8 pounds because my abdominal wall split so severely. And despite, having people I could call who specialized in building muscle, no one could help me because this was specific to women's health. And so it actually took me 2 years of kind of this relentless search to find answers because I wanted my life back. I wanted to be physically active. That was my stress management as well, and my happiness. And so eventually I found someone who did an ultrasound and was like, yeah, the connection is so limited here, you need surgery. But the point being is, if I can't get access to that care coming from the position of an elite athlete, then what woman should be expected to be able to navigate that? And so there are resources out there, but we're asking women to understand what's wrong with them and to know the solution in order to go out and find it. And that's where we really want to shift the paradigm, is like, we can see there's an issue. Let's work together to identify it and get you to the right place.
Wow. Jenn, and it's just another example, I think, that we've heard this throughout our conversation today, of you taking your experiences and the challenges you face and our adversities you face in that, and like learning from them, improving them, and like giving back to make the process better for others. I think that's just, it speaks volumes how you've done that as an athlete, you've done that post your athletic career, and are doing it now and continue to do it. So I think that's the true mark of a human performer, and what it means to be human. So thanks for sharing that. I'm curious if you have advice for others, given all of these different experiences, given your high achievements, your passion, your determination, your intensity. What advice do you have for others who might want to achieve high performance in the different domains of their lives?
Good question. I think for me, it was like this idea of choose impossible. Like, there's so many reasons that something shouldn't work for all of us. And so it's just this idea of not shying away from that big vision, and knowing that you can face the challenges along the way to solve it. And I think that's the other piece, is like, I've always tried to choose fear. And so when something scares me, or when I feel like I'm up against a wall, then I want to go through it, because I don't want that fear to have that power over my life. And so that's allowed me to continuously push through those obstacles. Like, I feel a lot of fear, whether, skiing down moguls or moving my family down from Canada to go to Stanford and build a company. But, I don't want to be defined by the fear that I feel. I'd rather be defined by what I do about it. And so those are kind of my motivating factors. And I mean, at the end of the day, you have to have joy in the journey. And so I think if it's not joyful, then you're doing the wrong thing. Like, it's not about, everyone says, like, do what makes you happy. That's not the sentiment. The sentiment is enjoy the process of what you're doing. And if there isn't that space, then you have to find something else, or at least a new process.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me, when you were talking about, really just taking on fear head on, and also almost like seeking out things that scare you and knowing that this is going to challenge you. And it reminds me of a quote from George Adair that says, everything you've ever wanted is sitting on the other side of fear. And I think you're just like the perfect example of what can be on the other side of that fear. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And we're coming up on the last few questions. A question that I wanted to ask you, which to me might be a little scary actually, but is meeting Queen Elizabeth II. I was just wondering if you could quickly share how that happened and like what that was like.
So I can. So I got that email from the government of Canada asking me to take part in the royal tour. But I read it kind of quickly. I was multitasking. I was like, what is this? And so I came back and I was like, what? And so, yeah, I was invited to, the government dinner with the Queen and Prince Philip. And so I had to get the ball gown and I had to do all these things. And like, I had a sponsor, Marcel Cosmetics at the time, that did my hair and makeup. And one of my other sponsors was Burke's, which is like the Tiffany of the US. And so I had all these diamonds, and I actually had to have a security guard walk me from the store to my car because I had so many diamonds for the
Wow.
And so,
oh my gosh.
yeah. And so I walk in and I'm in line to say hello to the Queen. And I basically like blanked out. I like put my hand in her hand, and then that was it. And I called my partner right after. I'm like, I met her. Like, I don't remember what I said it. And he's like, did she smile at you? I was like, no, she didn't even smile. And then I get this picture back, and she's like smiling, looking me in the eyes, and like this beautiful moment. But it's like I blacked out. I remember nothing. And then when it was time to sit down for dinner, I was seated at her table and got to eat, and like I felt so much pressure to figure out which fork and spoon to use. And also, side note, I had so many diamonds on, and it's like nothing compared to the queen. It was like I wasn't even wearing anything. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was the experience. But yeah, I mean, again, like such a incredible privilege to be an athlete and to get to be invited and partake in these sorts of things. So it's pretty wild.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I would need to go through some like visualization processes just to not be like spilling food all over, just like the being able to eat right. So yeah, that must have been a really cool experience. Well, coming up on our last questions, we were wondering, this is a question that we like to ask everyone, and I feel like you really have shared some times that when you talk about being down and broken, like I could imagine that there are times where in that you might have feelings of failure or loss, and we're wondering if you could share any specific time where you felt like you failed and what you learned from it.
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, my mindset's in performance right now. There's plenty of things I failed at outside of mogul skiing as well. But I remember I was expected to win world championships. It was just before the Olympics. And so I showed up and I was like pretty confident. And I was like, okay, I've got control. I'm going to win this thing. And then I came down and I was like 6. And I was like, what? Like, I was so good. I was so in control. And my coach was like, you were so slow. You had no spunk. And so I realized that there's also a place of over control. And so kind of this fine line of like being prepared, being in control, and then having the courage to let it go. Like, you don't control the outcome. And the only way you get to that next level of performance is to let go of the outcome. And so that was a really important lesson, you know, especially as I moved forward in my career, because the stakes only got higher and higher because I was expected to win. And so that was just, a critical moment to learn to let go of the outcome when it's the thing you want the most.
And I think circles back nicely with your theme of joy in the process. I feel like when I'm in, not that I've probably ever been in a flow state similar to the flow states you've been in, but when the few times I have felt sort of like in sync with, my body or what I'm doing, like I feel like I'm completely in that and not thinking about the outcome. Whereas as soon as you're, exactly like you're saying, as soon as you're sort of thinking about, oh, I'm doing so well, I'm gonna finish first or something, like that's sort of a note of you being maybe over controlled or outside of the flow.
So one comment on that though is, I think, first of all, don't rank your flow state, because then you're focused on the output, which you just did.
Right.
Or the outcome. Flow is flow, you take that. And 2, I think I don't want to suggest that you can't have a doubt or your mind can't move in a performance. Like, I remember telling my sports psychologist, like, sometimes I hear the crowd and it's so distracting. And then I go to outcome, and he's like, actually use that as a signal. Like, okay, I'm gonna like train my body that's a positive signal, and I'm gonna go back into my performance. And so knowing you can cue back in and out, knowing you can have self-doubt and back in, it's not all or nothing.
Right.
And I think that's often not well communicated from a performance standpoint. Like, I had so much doubt, in the start gate. And just being like, it's okay, it's normal. Now what do I need to focus on? And I would go in and out of that depending on the day and how good the day was. Sometimes you're more tired. Sometimes you have more doubt. You could go in and out of that all day. Like, that's literally the fight you're fighting.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. I like that. It's sort of like being like 100% sure doesn't mean having no doubt, right? It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's the ability to go back and forth. Yeah, I love that. Well, Jen, how can people follow you in your work?
Yeah, so we are going to launch in the fall, but there's a wait list if you're interested. cocohealth.ai, which shows our journey, what we're building, and yeah, would just love for people
Awesome.
to
Thank
leave
you.
a
I'm sure
comment
people will be
or get in
really
touch.
excited to follow that and follow you as well. I've had an incredible journey and just in so many different ways. And for closing, we want to know what you're most excited about for the future. And we're thinking of human performance, but I guess also health, or you can kind of take it in whatever direction you would want to take that in.
So I would say I'm most excited around personalized healthcare. I think we have the technology now, the power through machine learning and AI. So really excited to be involved in that on, in the early stages to be able to shape that and make sure that we're really giving power back to the user to be involved in their health journey, not responsible for their health journey, because that should still come from doctors, but involved. And then from a human performance standpoint, personally, I want to get barreled in a way. That's my goal that I need to take off the list in the next few years. So I've got a personal one and then a bigger one I'm working towards through the company.
Wow, we love that. I love that. Nobody's ever done a personal excitement, so way to take that and hit a home run. Jen, it's been so awesome having you here, and thanks for sharing all your experiences, the range of them, and I feel so inspired just having this conversation with you, and I'm so excited to share it with our listeners. Hopefully maybe we can even share it with like your second grade teacher or any other people who have been influential in your life too. But thanks for being here with us.
Well, thanks for having me, you guys. You're amazing. Your work is really incredible, and I've just been so grateful to get to know you guys and get to see
Thank you.
The amazing work you're doing and how you're pushing all this forward, and also your passion to get it out there and to share it. So thanks for having me.
Biomechanics off our minds.